Hey, what is happening? We are back with very long-time return guest Kurt Elster, who has been a Shopify partner since 2011. Now, Kurt helps e-commerce brands thrive in the digital marketplace. He's the founder of Ether Cycle. They are a boutique Shopify consultancy, and Kurt has worked with top-tier merchants like Jay Leno's Garage to uncover hidden profits and create exceptional online shopping experiences. But even better, he is known as the host of the unofficial Shopify podcast, over 2 million downloads, and Kurt is a trusted voice for merchants looking to grow their Shopify stores and master e-commerce. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about e-commerce, growing a company, dealing with the ups and downs, and most importantly, Kurt is going to set us straight about owning our own distribution channel. That way you don't have to be at the whims of the Google gods, the Facebook gods, the YouTube gods, the Instagram gods, you name it. You build a real business that lasts, that grows. So Kurt, glad to be speaking to you again after, I think, maybe 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. Man, it feels like no time, and then, at the same time, so much has changed, right? That was 2017. That's the before times, right? That was before a pandemic wildly accelerated and changed some things for us.
Well, yeah, 100%. And the pandemic, I think for me, is a blessing in disguise because the Zoom and the video chat and the podcasting, it's become more mainstream. And then coming out of the pandemic, LinkedIn really developed. So it's been a great way to reconnect with people like you and maybe get in touch with people you otherwise wouldn't have been able to, right? Email addresses change and bounce, and Facebook is not really a businessy place. So much has changed. So much continues to change. And especially with e-commerce back then, a lot of people were figuring it out. It was the Wild West. But now, like we said before we hit record, Shopify has TV commercials, and it's amazing what's happening. And so what has been happening with you? What has blown your mind? What have you accomplished? What is noteworthy and newsworthy to speak about right now?
Well, I think so. I've been a Shopify partner since 2011, 2012. And so it has been tremendous to watch that platform grow. And as a Shopify partner, just the whole time, pat myself on the back about hitching my cart to the right horse, of course.
Sure.
And with that, developing agency services and honing those things and really figuring out like where is our sweet spot. And ultimately, what I'm doing now versus 10 years ago, nothing has materially changed, but the way we go about it, the output, the result, all of it is better, is faster, is more efficient, is more profitable. And that feels pretty good, right? Some people want to borrow money. I like bootstrapping. Some people want to grow big teams. They want big teams. I don't necessarily want that. Honestly, I don't think lifestyle business is a evil label. And I have been quite successful and happy modestly growing a lifestyle business. But with it, we've gotten good at Shopify store migrations, Shopify themes, and growing this podcast. Oh my gosh, I think that's what we're here to discuss. Owning your distribution channel. And so many years ago, I said, like you, let's start a podcast, see what happens. And podcasting, it was like there was Serial, and that was it, right? There was that one big podcast, and then everything else. I don't know if Joe Rogan's around yet or what. And if you just started posting, right, podcasts, and you were consistent with it, and you did a halfway decent job on a niche topic, you could grow an audience. And that worked pretty well. And so I just kept going with it and never stopped because we gained sponsors, right? And so now this podcast, this content source has to be done every week because it is client deliverable. But it is now monetized directly in the form of those sponsorships and indirectly in that it generates leads and opportunities. But then creating the podcast has a flywheel effect where it attracts other people who want to be guests. And it's a form of networking where you get to know people and they want to work with you as well. And so just based on that, it's very attractive to own some kind of content platform, right? Because you now have something to offer. You have an audience. But for me, I want, when I reach out to a guest that I'm like, I want them on the show, it's because I want to have an interesting conversation with them. And the audience just happens to benefit from it. The thing that recently has accelerated our growth with that podcast is going in on video, which sounds silly, but when podcast was inherently audio and always was. And so then, trying to adapt that to video And then initially, like video, not long form interviews, not necessarily working well on YouTube, to today, I now religiously, we edit and publish 2 forms of the podcast. We do the audio one and the video one, and put it on YouTube. YouTube has become the platform, the distribution channel for discoverability on podcasts, or just podcast discoverability. And so I don't think I don't think it's a choice anymore. And so that's worked out well for me. It's worked out well for you and other podcasters. But owning a distribution channel like that, not limited to podcasts, right? I think you want to develop an audience that is in some ways platform independent, right? Like if my audience is entirely on Twitter, it's like 80% Elon Musk's audience, 20% mine. And I do those social media audiences are great. But if we think back to Facebook, there was a time where it's like Facebook posts were great and Facebook groups were great and pages were great. I don't even particularly use Facebook anymore. And just to get any reach on a Facebook page, you got to pay to promote that post. Whereas, podcasts, when you own a distribution platform, whether that's an email list, a podcast, etc., you have control over it, where it is much more difficult for someone, some other for-profit entity to try and monetize your audience for you against your will. And so it's like, you could build the audience on social, and I think that's helpful and important, but you don't want that to be like the sole acquisition channel of your business. I think years ago, someone told me, brands today should be TV stations. You should think of yourself as a little TV station where you are just like a local public access station. You're scrappy and you got to make content. And the problem, it never stops. You just got to keep making content. And and no one wants to do it at first because they're bad at it and they're embarrassed and it's cringy. And you just got to embrace it. You have to embrace it and be like, this is going to be hilariously bad the first go around. And that's fine. Because if you keep going, you get better at it. You'll build that audience and they'll grow with you.
We said a lot there, and there's a lot to think about,
Man,
right?
I monologued. I am so sorry.
But it's okay, because now there's 5 possible branching off points. And the other thing about us being on these video platforms these days and all the AI tools is that you have the reels, right? So what you just now said, well, you probably put out 15 different reels about all these ideas you had, right? About being platform independent and embracing the cringy beginningness of it. So it's all good. It's all good stuff that you said there. You're preaching to the choir, and there's some good self-awareness in there, especially with just getting something started, right? It's almost like there's these 3 or 4 phases you discuss. It's like the process of the caterpillar, right? There's the cocoon and the caterpillar and the butterfly, and it's there's different kind of goals and strategies every step along the way, right? At first, you're building your e-commerce brand, just making some content. You have to start with something, and all of your process hasn't been figured out. You haven't figured out sponsors, haven't figured out traffic, but you just kind of have to go and do it. And then once you get later on, there's kind of these other rules that end up being established, and then you kind of have to, in a way, keep putting out your content. But I think from all the stuff you said there's the need to be independent. And that's what's great about, somehow they finally figured out with podcasting, is they're like, hey, have your podcast, put it on Spotify, put it on Apple Podcasts, have your feed, and then you can choose to pay more attention to these other areas if they reward you. But if one day Spotify just said hey, we're going to be really selective about the podcasts we show, we'll give Joe Rogan 90% of the traffic and everyone else will get a trickle, then you can kind of take your business elsewhere or focus in other areas. So I think it's kind of a interesting duality, isn't it? That you have to kind of be well, here's, I'm everywhere, but then here's kind of my 2 or 3 top sources where I'm getting the most benefit. You look at your traffic data, right? Look at where everything's coming from, and you say, well, here's what I enjoy. Here's what I'll give some attention to. And so that's just a great roadmap, a great theory for some people. And so as far as what you have to brag about since we last spoke, these last 5 years, 10 years, what are some really big accomplishments of yours?
Oh man, millions in downloads. I'm proud of that because so much effort has gone into the podcast. But millions of downloads, which then led to working with some incredible partners and building some really neat websites. 2017, we would have recorded, and then later that year, I would have picked up what was then my dream client, Hoonigan. I had no idea that they were going to reach out to me. When you have an agency business, they say like your portfolio should reflect the clients you want. And I had started to put that into practice, trying to show more aftermarket automotive. Oh, yeah, that's another thing we did was really like have a niche of focus on aftermarket automotive and e-commerce, and to support that, created a ton of case studies. If you're in that position, that is fabulous content to make as case studies. But getting to work with my dream client, Hoonigan, oh my gosh, what fun! And then seeing them get purchased by Wheel Pros, and a few other stories like that. The other thing that really changed the nature of our business was when I finally figured out to sell support retainers on a monthly subscription. Where it's like, hey, you need a few people who are exceedingly good at solving problems with Shopify when you are a Shopify online store. And when you reach a particular size, suddenly it makes sense to just have someone on retainer, on call, who can take care of the inevitable headaches that come up. And so adding that into our agency business or service offering, that really changes things. Because, as a product business knows, subscriptions are great. They add predictable recurring revenue. If you're in a professional services business, having those subscription retainers is the equivalent of that. Versus, I love the big projects, the migrations and the custom theme builds, but they're less predictable and they're not recurring. And so being able to streamline cash flow for the business in that way was very beneficial. But it also lets us do more interesting, better work, right? When you're meeting regularly with someone who is invested in working with you, the clients who subscribe. It's been a journey for sure.
And I have to admit, like, I'm definitely not very fluent in Shopify, but a lot of what you're mentioning here, there's a lot of like WordPress parallels, right? Because a lot of these companies offer like the monthly maintenance and do kind of the big jobs. And I think when I wish I'd gone back and like listened to our podcast, because you're kind of awakening a memory. I think that Shopify plugins might have been fairly new, or maybe there were just like a limited number, but I remember you mentioning kind of this idea, and it kind of blew my mind a little bit. And so as far as like someone like me or an audience who they know about all these possibilities, right? They know about e-commerce, Amazon, WordPress, all these things. But as far as like the Shopify world and what's being done and what's possible, is there anything that you think needs more education, just to like wake us up, tell us about what we need to know about Shopify?
I'm trying, in years past, the misinformation we used to get about Shopify was more like, it was comparisons to WordPress or Magento, and it was like, oh, it's limited, you can't design X, Y, Z, or what I heard a lot that used to baffle me was it's bad for SEO, and then you'd be like, okay, how or why, and no one really had an answer for you beyond maybe like, well, Yoast, that WordPress plugin's not available for it. Actually, today Yoast is available for Shopify. I know. I think the biggest misconception around something like Shopify isn't necessarily the platform. It's just the nature of an online store business. The hard part's never going to be coming up with the idea. It's always going to be getting anyone to care. And so I think for someone who has not built an online business before, and you don't have walk-by traffic, like you are entirely responsible for all of the eyeballs that end up on the site. I think that's the thing I want people to understand. And so step one should always be like, hey, let's start trying to build an email list. Let's start trying to build a social following. Then, okay, now let's start brand building. Let's start validating.
I love that. And, I don't know if you've come across this, but I find people that are like, they're I don't know if they don't know or they're afraid of this idea that traffic takes so long and takes so much work, and they end up hiding behind, well, I need to choose a niche. Well, what should I have on my website? What should I use to power it? And I'm thinking like, it doesn't even really matter that much what you use to power it. Just get something created. And if you find yourself getting stuck and there's like a reason, enough of a reason to like, migrate from one system to another, well, great, but just like get something started, just get some people looking at it. And again, I don't know if it's like the ignorance or the fear, but as far as maybe just both. Like the hesitate, maybe all of the above, or some combination of like just validating your idea. And so like, how, like, do you get frustrated too, or how can we get people past this and just get them towards making some mistakes, getting some eyeballs?
Well, I think your impression is right. I have had the exact same thought. I do think that's what's going on. Is you're like, hey, I've got this thing. I'm really in love with this idea I came up with, and it's probably your first go around, right? And so there's a lot of unknown. And I think when you're moving into entrepreneurship for the first time, you're still looking for permission. You're looking for someone to say, this is okay. Like, you should move to the next step now, and then maybe you revisit this later. Because going through academia, there's always a person who is gatekeeping. And when you have a job and you are looking for a job, however, there's someone who is gatekeeping. In entrepreneurship, it's you. It's all you. And so the amount of like mindset and soul searching you have to do as an entrepreneur, especially early on, is tough. And you just got to get over that. You got to get over the cringe level, right? No one wants to be embarrassed of the thing they put out in the world. And they also don't want to face the fact that, like, when you first put something out in the world and you haven't built an audience, well, nothing's going to happen and no one cares. And that's frustrating because you spent so much time building this thing you're very proud of. And then, of course, with experience, you'll discover, like, man, I didn't even know what I was doing the first time around. And that's a good thing. Like, every 6 to 12 months, you should be embarrassed of the thing you built because it means you grew. You now know, like, this is how I do this better. And so, I mean, this is that sign. I'm giving you that permission. Please go forward, launch that thing, take the next step, whatever it is. But yeah, I think like early, people don't necessarily know it, but they're looking for that permission. Like, don't I need a business license? Isn't there some kind of governing body to tell me this is all right to do? And no, there isn't.
But you can get that, right? You can hire a coach, even though then that's another thing to not do. But it's like you can find that person who can advise you, and even when you're on the other side of that, like, because we all have like friends in this space, right? We all have like our peers or people we just kind of get on calls and chat with, and like when someone tells you your idea, something I don't even know if I was doing it incorrectly, but maybe like 5-6 years ago, it's like, well, be an encouraging person, right? If someone says, hey, I've got this idea for some new e-commerce product, it's like, unless it sounds like completely terrible, be like, hey, like, get it online as quick as possible. Validate your idea. Who am I to say that it won't work just because I wouldn't do that, or I've seen something like that has failed? And so I think that, yeah, it's a very good reason to look for the optimism. And if you can, hire a coach who will get you pointed in the right direction just to remove the hesitation and the speed. Because another scary thing is that the people that are already in your circle, like people who are maybe like, family, friends, coworkers, ex-coworkers, whatever, they kind of might hold you back down to their level because
they don't want to see you change.
Yeah, and
the human brain hates change.
They're not entrepreneurs. Yeah.
Yes, they see, like, they know you as you are, and people are resistant to change. It is just human nature, whether it's yourself or other people. And so someone else saying, I am going to change my identity. You're saying, I'm going to start a business. That's what they're hearing. You are changing. Someone saying, I'm going to change my identity. And in doing so, I am going to change, like, your worldview. And so you'll have people try and talk you out of it just because it's their natural instinct is to try and maintain the status quo. And so sometimes you may want to wait to tell people, keep it a secret, right? Like, if you were pregnant, you wait 90 days before you tell anybody. Similar thing, you may want to wait until it's like the business idea is kind of past the point of no return. It's already started. And you're like, well, too late trying to talk me out of it. I already did it. Yeah. No, I've seen a lot of that, and it's frustrating.
And it makes sense the way that you explain it, because, like, I mean, we've all lost friends who, like, say, like, they had a family before you did, and then, like, you kind of lost them as a friend, and then you, like, had the kid later, but then it's the bridge is already burned, or, like, they're already kind of moved on, and they have their new friends. And so it's kind of sad, but that can happen too with location change, job change, business change. And so as far as in the spirit, we keep mentioning this topic of embracing the cringe and getting something solid. That way, someone can beat up your idea, but they can't destroy your idea. So in our last few minutes here, do you have a good cringy story to tell us? Because I love the idea of kind of like cycling and iterating and going back and like redoing the website, redoing the brand, and kind of updating it. And I find sometimes I let websites sit, right? Or I let the podcast intro, like it's years since it's been updated. And I'm jealous of people that like update their speaker page every year or two. So do you have a fun story to share with us about the cringe and the kind of like renewing, refreshing of your product, brand, business?
Well, I mean, just, I don't know that I necessarily have anything fun, but it is just today I was reminded that, oh, I used to do a ton of stuff with marketing automation, with email marketing automation. I'm like, I should, and I'd gotten frustrated and turned a lot of it off. And I went back, turned some stuff on, and discovered I had multiple pop-ups running concurrently, just like firing right over each other. And it was probably like that for a year. No one noticed, no one told me. I'll find typos in pages that are like years old. No one noticed, no one told me. I don't know, that one always drives me nuts. Typos? Come on, there's no excuse for a typo. The computer solves everything for you. Yeah, that stuff. But it would be stranger if you went back and revisited that stuff and then went, oh, this is perfect and there's no need to change anything. Right? That tells you you have stagnated. You have not improved at all. That's not what you want. Like, the goal, I think, is to be cringe. Embrace it.
100%.
At the same time, I think, well, no, your turn. You go.
No, I just meant, well, the way that you're saying it, there's like three possibilities, right? You look back at that old stuff you made, email automation, website, whatever. Either it's the same now as it was then, which like you're the same. Is it better? That's not good, right? You've declined. So you do want the past to have progressed more than, like, you want the present to have progressed better than the past. So that's just the way that you laid it out. That's how I digest it. But don't let me stop you.
No, I was going to say, I think the other, as long as we're on the topic of, mindset and how you view these things, I think the other mistake people make early on is viewing everyone as a competitor. And really, it's, for the most part, most people are not your competitor. Like, you and I both host a podcast. We're not competitors because someone can listen to multiple podcasts. And in fact, outside of the recording, before and after, I'm sure we're going to discuss podcasts and gain insight. Like, I give you some tips, and I'm sure you'll have some for me. So the quote I would stick to is, other than embrace the cringe, which I enjoy, do hard things, embrace the suck, and of course, a rising tide lifts all ships. This is like one of my favorite truisms, right? If we, as a whatever it is, as a group, culture, society, team, if things are better for a majority of people, things are better for everybody. And so I think in business, if you can look for collaborators, if you could find people to partner with, whether that's like a weekly call, somebody you could just text with and ask questions, a joint venture on a product, some collab product, a launch, whatever it is, when you can leverage other people's experience and brands through your own relationships, that's when you'll experience that effect. A rising tide lifts all boats.
100%. And I've found myself having to fight the competitive thought process sometimes, because sometimes I found someone who's like exactly what I do, but then it's like, well, they are higher ticket or they serve like certain kinds of clients. So I still would fight it and still kind of maybe for the first few minutes of a meeting, like pretend to be nice, but then be like, oh, hey, like we're not competitors at all. And then I get different ideas. And there's even been situations where like there's one guy where he was very similar to me, but he had a problem client, and I'm like, hey, I'll take him, and it worked out. So it's like, even if someone's like exactly you, well, maybe there's even still some kind of an exchange to be had there. At the very least, some ideas or some referrals. And we've all been in that situation as well, right? Where they said like, hey, who do you know? And you think like, hey, I can pass them off, but I can, introduce this person or that person. And so it's just, it's definitely, I don't know if it's a new way of doing things, but it's for sure like the way it's done now versus maybe 20, 30 years ago. It was more of a limiting mindset. And now with social media and e-commerce and everything just like flying around, so much activity, we kind of need to be social people, even if it's someone that you say like, oh, well, I don't know about how I'd get along with that person. You don't know unless you have the conversation. And it kind of comes full circle. It's also a pitch for podcasting, right? Because some of these people you might have been like, oh, I don't like the guy. Meet him on a podcast. Well, hey, he's not too bad, and he's maybe smarter than I thought or more accomplished than I thought. And I definitely want to make sure that there's time here to promote you and Ether Cycle. But in this last few minutes of our conversation, going all these random topics, which is great, is there a missing hidden question that you wish I would ask you that I just don't know to ask you?
I don't know. Well, we talked a lot about mindset, and with mindset, I want to, and you mentioned mindset as well. Where do you struggle? Right? What is difficult about maintaining a entrepreneurial mindset?
Where do I?
I'm
Are you
asking
turning the
you.
question around on me?
Yeah, I have an answer, but I'm asking you.
I think that maybe the managing the stress or having like the right amount of stress. Like I find I don't want to be too relaxed, right? I tell my wife all the time, like, well, I don't want to drop the ball on this, and I find myself maybe creating like some stress in order to give myself an urgency to meet deadlines or push enough or maybe overcome the hesitancy, self-doubt that's needed for the social interaction, to do the sales calls, to do podcasts like this one. So I just find myself, I'm better than I used to be, but I find myself still creating a small artificial amount of stress in order to get things done. And I wish I wasn't that way. So that's my answer to you, is my entrepreneurial struggle is creating the stress in order to stay like focused and organized, because I'm kind of in it by myself.
I like this. I think there are two kinds of stress. There's stress and eustress. And eustress could be positive, motivating stress. And it sounds like you have mastered that as a skill. You are able to create eustress for yourself intentionally to stay motivated and hungry and humble. And I think that's an underrated skill that you may have developed working as it sounds like in a solo effort.
Yes.
My own answer to that question is, man, doom scrolling on social media, it's so hard to not, because everyone's just posting their wins, right? And there is danger in that. Everybody's on Twitter posting their wins, and you're reading it, and if they're like, you've seen the 20th person talk about the phenomenal thing they did, you're like, well, clearly I am human garbage because I have not managed all of these things in one day. And it's nuts, because it's like you're comparing yourself to not just one person, you're comparing yourself to dozens of people. Your brain is only picking the highlights. The person who's posting is only posting the highlights, and they're giving you the half truth and then not sharing, all the times that things went wildly bad for them, right? Nobody's posting that stuff. Kudos to the people who do. But in even knowing all that, like, I'm able to articulate the problem with the behavior that I'm engaging in. I still do it.
Course.
Because it sneaks up on you. You're like, oh, Twitter's fun. Oh, there's a notification. And scroll. And then 20 minutes later, you're like, why do I feel like I want to die? It's because you're scrolling too long. Like, these social platforms, not necessarily the healthiest thing at times.
And what have you done with that? Because I found myself, like, I barely go on Twitter. Maybe this last couple of months, I say I quit Facebook, but I probably I reinstall the app like once a month to post pictures of my son, and then I like take the app back off. And then LinkedIn, I told myself like it became my primary, but LinkedIn is kind of superficial in its own way also. And a lot of the times I feel like it's all Chat GPT posts, and then I
It
generate
is.
a Chat GPT comment and then reshare and generate that Chat GPT, and then I just feel so. I mean, like, you talk about human garbage. I feel like AI garbage, and so
Yeah,
I kind of
LinkedIn for sure is just it's just ChatGPT talking to itself.
yes. So I find myself just like getting kind of bored with it, which I guess is good. Like they say, like with your phone, if you get too addicted to like change the color to grayscale, and then your brain doesn't get as like turned on by it. And I feel like
Yeah.
LinkedIn has turned into that for me. It's become like a grayscale platform, and then I guess what does that leave? Like YouTube and TikTok. And so I found myself like becoming more bored with it and dialing back. But what have you done as far as like fixing your own, I don't know, like emotional after effects from social media?
So the number one thing you could do is acknowledge it. When you can, I was able to explain to you the issue that I engage in. And so often I'm able to identify it, and then I have to straight up put my phone elsewhere. Because if it's near me, it is attracted to my hand almost magnetically. Like, I will it's just fun. I'll put my phone away. I'm like, I'm going to go in I'll put it in my bedroom, and then I'm going into a different floor without it. And by the time I'm downstairs, I'm like, how did it get back in my pocket? I don't remember picking it up and putting it in my pocket. And so I'll intentionally just leave it in a different room. Struggle that may be. I love, what you said. You're like, hey, change the lock screen and the wallpaper. I did that when my phone was just a black lock screen, I used it much less. But it's so hard to resist. I put a photo of my wife on there always. And it's seasonal. It changes with the season. And it just makes me use the damn phone more because I love my wife. And there's this big photo that I can swipe up. Even though you know what's happening, it still breaks your brain. Like there's still primal parts of your brain you can't defeat. Same with like the notifications. They're just meant to addict you. And so I never install the native apps for social accounts just to try to slow them down. I do everything logged in and I have 2-factor. So it's such a pain to like, once I've logged out of an account, tough to log back in. And then on my desktop, I use an app called Freedom. And Freedom you give it a block list and it works very well. And I have it on a schedule like Monday through Friday. It just blocks a whole bunch of websites. And that's what it took to break me, of those habits. And even then I still want to do it.
Okay, so you're saying the first step is to have some awareness, but then there's like that period of difficulty, right? It's like if you keep eating cookies all day, every day, well, you might have a tough couple of days giving up eating the cookies, and then maybe introduce it and have a little bit, but be more intentional when it is that you're doing it. And so, man, we've covered all sorts of subtopics about the entrepreneurial condition, haven't we? And that's the fun of podcasting is you can go on, you can say, hey, my expertise is this, but I talk about this all day, every day. Let's kind of think outside the box. Let's embrace the randomness, right? Like you mentioned about like Joe Rogan. We all have mixed feelings, right, about like Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, but there was one of those couple of times when Elon Musk was on Joe Rogan and like they had this deep conversation and he'd ask Elon like some question. He'd kind of sit there for like 10, 20 seconds, like thinking of like a really good answer. And so that's the fun of podcasting, right? You can have these deep conversations about whatever the heck you feel like, and it goes wherever it ends up going. But in the final minutes here, getting people back to some focus, to a call to action. Tell us about Ether Cycle. Tell us about you. Tell us about, after listening to this conversation, what should someone be motivated to go and do?
Man, if you've got a Shopify store and you are wondering how you can improve it, and really it's how can I make more sales, right? That's the thing you're thinking. I've got a lead gen pop up on ethercycle.com. Scroll halfway down any page, this thing will pop up and offer you a free screencast audit. And just put in name, email, website. I will spend 5 to 10 minutes. I will record a screencast going through your site and send it to you with advice. Personalized, real deal. I'm decided to do something that doesn't scale. That's, earlier I mentioned like, man, I used to be really into marketing automation. I got to get back into it. So I'm getting back into it with a pop-up and something that doesn't scale. And it's that. So give that a shot. Otherwise, Google me, Kurt Elster, check out the unofficial Shopify podcast. Lots of interviews with merchant entrepreneurs.
Very cool. And I like that idea, that doing something that doesn't scale, because there's like not everyone will fill that out, right? And just like if someone already talks themselves out of doing podcasting and say, oh, it's all this time commitment. Well, how many people will actually go on a podcast? It's a kind of a limiting gatekeeping barrier in a good way. And so that's a great idea. And it kind of, I'm sure it tickles the automationness of your brain, right? To get that back, because it's like, well, there's the pop-up, but I imagine it like sets up tasks for you. And so that way you can just bust these out. And so everybody wins, right? Because they get this kind of personalized, free deliverable. And then for you, it ends up kind of keeping your finger on the pulse of the marketplace. It gives you all this great content, case studies. And I'm sure that funnel wise, it has helped you because that's a way to stand out, right? Everyone else has a video or a report or something. You're like, hey, this is your actual site. And here's me doing an actual screencast audit, giving you some ideas of what to soup up and improve. So you said there's the unofficial Shopify podcast. There's Kurt Elster. Do that Google search. That's ELSTER. And then the official website here is ethercycle.com. That's ETHERCYCLE.com. They turn your Shopify store into a revenue-generating powerhouse of persuasion, ethercycle.com. And as we're wrapping up our conversation here, Kurt, podcasting, that we like to end with a bang instead of a whimper. So in the final soundbite, TikTok, YouTube short, reel sort of context, do you have an interesting, fun quote or lesson that has served you that you can pass on to us?
I absolutely do. When you are stuck on any problem and you are just tearing your hair out, you're not sure what to do, ask yourself, what would someone smarter than me do? And the chances are you already know the answer. It was just that permission setting mindset. And so when you reframe it, suddenly you're like, oh, I know what to do.
Nice, with a sound effect and everything. So if you're out there in e-commerce land stuck with your Shopify store, what would someone smarter than you do? Well, you might ask Kurt Elster for help. So you can go to ethercycle.com, and we talked about all these entrepreneurial ideas like getting a coach, getting encouragement, someone telling you it's okay to proceed. So go to ethercycle.com, scroll halfway down the page, you'll see that pop up, and take Kurt up on his offer for him to do that screencast audit. That way you can do what someone smarter than you would do, which is ask for outside help from your higher entrepreneurial power, right? Your business coach. And so check out ethercycle.com. You'll love it. And thank you very much, Kurt, for giving us I don't know, I feel like we could write a book now, right? We have these 20 laws or these 20 things that entrepreneurs should do. So I really appreciate the conversation.
I think it sounds like there's an info product coming down the road here, but I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kurt.